while since we've talked about an outlaw on this channel. Welcome back to Heart of Texas, Histories and Mysteries. I'm your host, Em, coming to you as always from deep in the heart of Texas. The subject of today's episode will be the notorious John Wesley Hardin. Before I begin, I will note that much of the information about this Wild West figure comes from his autobiography, which has been characterized as a combination of fact and fantasy.
While historians have been unable to corroborate many of the details in Hardin's account, including the number of men he killed, he was inarguably one of the most feared outlaws of his time, taking lives and wreaking havoc in his native Texas and beyond. John Wesley Hardin, also known as Wes Hardin, was born northeast of Dallas on May 26, 1853. Some sources list Bonham as his birthplace, while other sources state that he was born in the nearby community of Whitewright. When he was about 6 years old, the family moved to Sumter, a community that was about halfway between Tyler and Houston, and of which only a cemetery now remains. His parents, James Gibson, or Gip Hardin, and Mary Elizabeth Dixon Hardin, named him after John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist faith. Gip Hardin was himself a traveling preacher, and he hoped that his son Wes would follow in his footsteps. But Wes would take a very different path, to say the least. The Hardins were related to a number of influential figures, including Revolutionary War hero and North Carolina legislator Colonel Joseph Hardin and Senator Martin D. Hardin of Kentucky. They were also related to Martin Davis Hardin, who was a Union general during the Civil War, and Benjamin Hardin Helm, who was a Confederate general. It seems that Gip Hardin was elected to be a captain in the Confederate Army, but that he never went off to battle because members of the community convinced him to stay home and continue his work as a religious leader. When John Wesley Hardin was 9 years old, he and one of his brothers attempted to run away and fight for the Confederacy themselves. Gip Hardin supposedly gave his sons a serious beating for this when he found them and brought them home. Wes Hardin allegedly witnessed his first murder when he was 8 years old and saw one man stab another. I was unable to find out whether he displayed any violent behavior as a young child, but his first known altercation occurred at school when he was 14. A boy named Charles Slaughter accused him of writing something insulting on the wall about a female student, possibly in the form of a poem. Hardin not only denied being the writer of this language, but claimed that it had been the work of Slaughter himself. Slaughter came at him with a knife, but Hardin was armed with a knife of his own and stabbed Slaughter before Slaughter could get to him. Slaughter's wounds were so severe that he nearly died. Hardin apparently came close to being expelled, but was allowed to remain at the school after convincing the staff that he had acted out of self-defense. A year later, Wes Hardin did take a person's life. In November 1868, he challenged a young man named Major Holzhausen, who was known as Mage, to a wrestling match. Mage had previously been a slave of Hardin's uncle. Hardin said that he won this wrestling match. Other sources say that it became very heated with no apparent winner and that the two had to be separated. Shortly afterward, Hardin was riding his horse, Old Paint, in Polk County when he and Mage crossed paths. Hardin stated that he shot Mage in self-defense, after Mage called him a coward and threatened him with a stick. He shot Mage 5 times. Hardin claimed that he fled the scene to find help. Mage was mortally wounded and passed away 3 days later. This incident occurred during the Reconstruction era, and Wes Hardin's father advised him to go into hiding, saying that Union officials would surely come after him when they learned about what had happened. He went to stay with a relative, but the authorities figured out his whereabouts fairly quickly. Wes Hardin later wrote that he chose to confront the 3 Union soldiers whom his brother Joseph had told him were on their way to arrest him. He ambushed, shot, and killed all of them. It's been said that area locals helped cover for Hardin by hiding the bodies in a creek bed. Now responsible for the deaths of 4 men, 15-year-old Wes Hardin was on the run again. Somewhere along the way, he formed a connection with Frank Polk, an outlaw in his own right who was wanted for killing a man named Tom Brady. The two traveled together through Navarro County. A group of soldiers had been sent from Corsicana to pursue them and ultimately caught up with them. They succeeded in arresting and temporarily jailing Frank Polk, but Wes Hardin got away. Hardin is said to have stuck around in Navarro County for a while, even teaching school in the Pisgah community. He claimed that while in Pisgah, he shot out a man's eye in a bet, winning himself a bottle of whiskey. He also said that before fleeing the area, he and his cousin, Simp Dixon, each killed a Union soldier. Hardin is said to have killed another man in Leon County around this time as well. Wes Hardin's next known act of violence was against a man named Benjamin Bradley. Some sources say that this incident occurred on Christmas Day, 1869, while others say that it occurred on January 5, 1870. What is certain is that Hardin and Bradley were playing a game of cards in Tawash, a town in Hill County that now lies beneath Lake Whitney. As the story goes, Bradley became enraged as Hardin continued to beat him and at one point threatened that he would cut out Hardin's liver if Hardin won again. Later that same night, Bradley shot at Hardin but missed. Instead of carrying his 2 pistols at the hip, Hardin carried them in shoulder holsters. He preferred to reach inside of his vest and cross his arms to draw his weapons. Some say that he was the inventor of the cross-draw method in the Wild West. He shot Bradley once in the head and once in the chest, killing him. A man known as Judge Moore, who had been holding Hardin's money as well as a weapon of Hardin's, also went missing around this time. Hardin did claim that he killed 2 men in Hill County. Not long afterward, on January 20th, 1870, Wes Hardin was at a circus in Horn Hill, Limestone County, when he got into a fight and killed a man. Just a few nights later, he was with a lady of the evening in Caussey, another community in Limestone County, when a man who was supposedly her pimp approached them and demanded money. Hardin threw money all over the ground and, as the man bent to gather it, shot him to death. In the January of 1871, when he was still a few months shy of his 18th birthday, Hardin was actually arrested. But the arrest was not for any of the crimes we've discussed so far. Instead, it was for a crime he denied committing, the killing of Laban Hoffman, the Waco city marshal. Hardin was briefly jailed in Marshall, then placed in the custody of 2 state policemen, Edward Stakes and Jim Smalley, who were to take him to Waco to await trial. Hardin had bought a revolver from a fellow inmate while he was in jail in Marshall. Hardin claimed that when Captain Stakes went off to buy some food for their horses, Officer Smalley beat him with the butt of a pistol. Faking tears, Hardin went to hide behind a horse and then shot the officer dead. He escaped on horseback. He claimed that 3 men by the names of Davis, Jones, and Smith caught up with him and arrested him, but that he took advantage when they became drunk and careless later on and killed them with their own guns somewhere in Bell County. Wes Hardin then moved on to Gonzales and stayed with some cousins, the Clements, who convinced him to join them on a cattle drive to Kansas. This would be a way for Hardin to make money, but he also figured it would keep him away from Texas long enough for the authorities to give up on searching for him. He apparently had some success in this endeavor. In his autobiography, he wrote that he worked for Jake Johnson and Columbus Carroll, and that he became a trail boss for the herd. But, being Wes Hardin, he also found plenty of trouble along the way. He got into fights with several Mexican vaqueros or cowboys, one of whom shot at Hardin, putting a bullet through Hardin's hat. Hardin sought this man out later and shot him in the head. This led to a firefight between Hardin's group and the other man's, during which Hardin claimed to have killed 5 additional vaqueros. According to some sources, records show that the number of vaqueros killed in this incident was 3. Hardin also wrote that he killed 2 Native American men during his time on the cattle drive, one of whom had attempted to shoot him with an arrow, and the other of whom had been trying to get Hardin to pay a tax. In addition, he claimed that he once sent a war party into flight after shooting at one of its members for killing a beef cow, and that he once hit a Native American man over the head for attempting to steal a silver bridle. At a restaurant in Abilene, Kansas, Wes Hardin and an acquaintance by the name of Payne exchanged words with another patron who was making anti-Texan remarks. The situation ended with this man being shot in the mouth, and Wes Hardin is said to have been the one who pulled the trigger. Hardin fled Abilene after this incident. On the 4th of July, 1871, an unnamed man killed Texas trail boss William Corrin about 40 miles south of the town. This man was himself shot dead at a restaurant in Sumner County, Kansas. Wes Hardin claimed that he was one of the 2 cowboys who shot the outlaw. He also wrote that he had been deputized as a law enforcement officer and that Texas cattlemen gave him a reward for his role in taking down Corrin's killer. Later in the summer of 1871, Wes Hardin was back in Abilene, Kansas, and going by the name of Wesley Clemens. To many locals, however, he was known as Little Arkansas. It was during this time that he became acquainted with Wild Bill Hickok, who was then the town marshal. In fact, Wild Bill may have been the first to call Hardin Little Arkansas. Ben Thompson, who would later become the city marshal of Austin, and a gambler named Phil Coe, had opened the Bull's Head Tavern. Local residents took issue with an image painted on an outside wall of the establishment, considering it to be vulgar. When Thompson and Co. refused to change it, Hickok did so himself. Hoping to get Wes Hardin on his and Co.'s side, an angry Thompson told Hardin of Hickok, "He's a damn Yankee, picks on rebels, especially Texans, to kill." Rather surprisingly, Hardin replied, "If Bill needs killing, why don't you kill him yourself?" There was an incident in which Hickok caught Hardin illegally carrying guns and asked him to hand them over. Hardin gave in, but not before performing a maneuver in which he flipped his guns around so that Hickok found himself face to face with the muzzles. Both men walked away from this incident unharmed, however, and Hardin came to respect Wild Bill. In fact, Hardin was proud to be associated with Hickok, who was a famous gunfighter in his own right. It's been said that Hickok later allowed Hardin to carry his guns around Abilene when he didn't give others the same privilege. Wes Hardin also claimed that when his cousin, Manon Clements, went to jail for killing 2 cowhands, he asked Hickok to arrange for Clements' escape, and Hickok obliged. Hickok apparently did not know about Hardin's own status as a wanted man. Next came one of Wes Hardin's most famous deeds. In August 1871, he, his cousin Gip Clements, and their friend Charles Cougar decided to stay at the American House Hotel after a long night of gambling and drinking. Hardin and Clements shared a room, while Cougar took the room next door. At one point, Hardin awoke to the sound of Cougar's snoring. He yelled at Cougar to roll over, but got no response from the other side of the wall. A frustrated Hardin then fired several shots through the wall, one of which hit Cougar in the heart as he slept, killing him instantly. Even if Hardin's intention had only been to wake Cougar up, firing a gun within the Abilene city limits was illegal in and of itself. Despite the good relationship Hardin had with Wild Bill Hickok, this was something Hardin knew Wild Bill would not let him get away with. He and his cousin Gip climbed out their window onto the roof of the hotel, just in time to see Hickok and several other officers on the street below. I'm not sure what happened to Gip Clements at this point, but Wes Hardin escaped the premises and hid under a haystack until morning. He stole a horse and supposedly ambushed 3 lawmen 30 or so miles outside of Abilene. However, he did not claim to have killed them, but to have made them walk back to Abilene. Hardin then set off for Texas. He would never return to Abilene, Kansas again. Word traveled fast about Wes Hardin, aka Wesley Clemens, killing a man for snoring. Years later, Hardin would say, "They tell lots of lies about me. They say I killed 6 or 7 men for snoring. Well, it ain't true. I only killed 1 man for snoring." Once he was back in Texas, Hardin didn't stay out of trouble for long. He was involved in a number of gunfights between the fall of 1871 and the summer of 1872. In one of these gunfights, which occurred at a general store in Gonzales County in October 1871, he killed Officer Green Paramore and wounded Officer John Lackey. Officers Paramore and Lackey, who were both freedmen, were part of Governor Edmund Davis's Reconstruction-era Special Police Force. A posse from Austin pursued Hardin for this crime. He claimed that he ambushed and killed all 3 of its members. Hardin also wrote of being pursued by 2 men outside of Corpus Christi, claiming that he shot one of the men off his horse after the other man had already quit the fight. He was supposedly involved in another gunfight in Montgomery County. It's unknown whether this incident resulted in any fatalities. And then there was the incident in Sabine County in which Hardin shot and wounded Sonny Spates, a Texas state policeman. There was another major event that occurred in Wes Hardin's life in 1872, his marriage to Jane Bowen. But becoming a husband and eventually a father of 3 didn't exactly convince him to stay out of trouble. In fact, he would involve himself in what has been called the longest and bloodiest feud in Texas history. The Sutton-Taylor feud was a complicated series of events in its own right, and I won't go into too much detail about it here. But to summarize, it was a decade-long affair that spread out from DeWitt County and claimed as many as 35 lives. Central to the conflict were the Taylor family's opposition to Reconstruction and the Sutton family's alliance with the Texas State Police, a creation of the aforementioned Governor Davis, who had been a Union general during the Civil War. Some of Wes Hardin's cousins had already taken the Taylor side in the feud, and Hardin would demonstrate his allegiance to the Taylor faction as well. First, however, he would have his own brush with death. In August 1872, Wes Hardin was gambling at the Gate Saloon in Trinity. He had beaten a man named Phil Sublette in a poker game. Sublette, angered over losing money, shot Hardin and struck him in the kidney. Initially, Hardin was not expected to survive. While he did recover from his injury, it of course took him some time to recuperate. The authorities were able to take full advantage of this. Cherokee County Sheriff Richard Reagan learned that Hardin was staying at a friend's house and arrived to arrest him. Hardin handed over his guns and told the sheriff that he wanted to be tried for his crimes and clear the slate. It's been said that a deputy who came to assist with the arrest was so nervous that he accidentally fired his gun, wounding Hardin in the knee. But this new injury was apparently minor, and Hardin was brought to the county jail without further incident. I'm not sure how many murders Hardin was charged with after his surrender, but it was definitely a higher number than he had been expecting, and he decided that complying with the authorities wasn't something he wanted to do after all. In November 1872, he got a relative to smuggle him a hacksaw. Even though he supposedly had 6 men guarding him, Wes Hardin escaped from jail. It's been said that he raised livestock for a few months after making his escape, but he wouldn't lead a quiet life for long. Hardin was suspected of being involved in the killings of Jim Cox and Jake Christman, who were aligned with the Sutton family, in May 1873. He refused to confirm or deny this. But it's always been accepted that Hardin was the killer of DeWitt County Sheriff Jack Helm and DeWitt County Deputy Sheriff J.B. Morgan in July 1873. Sheriff Helm, who had previously been a captain with the Texas State Police, was a leader of the Sutton faction and had been involved in the killings of several members of the Taylor family and their allies. Wes Hardin also stated openly that he and his brother Joseph, along with Bill and Jim Taylor, had been involved in the killings of Billy Sutton and Gabriel Slaughter in March 1874. In May of that year, Hardin was at a saloon in Comanche for his 21st birthday. When he saw Deputy Sheriff Charles Webb of Brown County there, he grew suspicious that Webb had come to arrest him. Webb denied this, and Hardin invited him to have a drink. But Hardin shot and killed Webb a short time later. He claimed that Webb had drawn his gun first. Some reports stated that Webb had been taking an arrest warrant for an accomplice of Hardin's out of his pocket when he was shot. After this incident, officials across Texas set their sights on Wes Hardin more than ever before. He fled the state once again, this time heading to Alabama and Florida. His wife, children, and parents were apparently put under protective custody around this time, and it seems that Hardin did reconnect with his wife and children in Florida. He also killed at least one more man there, although the number could be as high as 5. Back in his home state, the legislature authorized a $4,000 reward for his arrest. In July 1877, the Texas Rangers caught up with Wes Hardin in Florida. Ranger Jack Duncan, who was working undercover, intercepted a letter from Hardin's brother-in-law to Hardin's father-in-law. This letter revealed that Hardin was staying near the Alabama-Florida border and going by the name of John or James Swain. The Rangers, along with some local officers, arrested him on a train in Pensacola. He was brought back to Texas to be tried for the murder of Charles Webb. Wes Hardin was sentenced to 25 years at the state prison in Huntsville. While he did make several attempts to escape, he also worked on his autobiography and engaged in some self-improvement activities during his time behind bars. His father had died in 1876 at the age of 53, some said due to a broken heart over all of the violent actions of his son. And it's possible that Wes Hardin felt remorse for this and wanted to do something that would make Gip Hardin proud. He studied theology and even became superintendent of the prison's Sunday school. He also studied law. After being pardoned and released in 1894, he was admitted to the bar. He set off for El Paso in 1895, not only to testify for the defense in a murder trial, but to open a law practice. Wes Hardin did, in fact, work as a lawyer, but, as always, his efforts to settle down and become more respectable were short-lived. In El Paso, he took on a client named Martin Moroz, who was a cattle thief. After Moroz fled to Mexico, Wes Hardin and Moroz's wife, Beulah, began a love affair. Hardin's first wife, Jane, had passed away while he was in prison, and in early 1895 he had married 15-year-old Callie Lewis. He and Callie had already separated by the time he left for El Paso, but remained legally married. Despite being out of the country, Moroz found out about this betrayal and vowed to confront Hardin. A lawman named George Scarborough promised Moroz that he would be able to safely cross the border back into Texas. But as Moroz re-entered the United States, a group of officers, which apparently included Scarborough himself, shot and killed him. Rumor had it that Wes Hardin had hired the men to kill Moroz. There are differing accounts as to how events unfolded after the death of Martin Moroz. Some sources say that Wes Hardin had words with an El Paso officer named John Selman Jr. after he arrested Beulah Moroz for brandishing a gun, and that the officer's father, Constable John Selman Sr., confronted Hardin afterward. But it's also been said that John Selman Sr. was one of the men Hardin had hired to kill Martin Moroz and that he was angry because Hardin had not paid him. Regardless of why Selman had an issue with Hardin, the fact is that on August 19th, 1895, he entered El Paso's Acme Saloon and shot Hardin 3 times. At age 42, Texas's most infamous outlaw and gunfighter was dead. Selman claimed self-defense, but his trial resulted in a hung jury. In April 1896, when he was out on bond and awaiting a second trial, he got into a fight with none other than George Scarborough. Scarborough shot Selman 4 times, and Selman died the next day. He was buried at Concordia Cemetery in El Paso, the same cemetery where Wes Hardin was buried. In 1995, 100 years after his death, some of Wes Hardin's descendants tried to have his body moved to Nixon, Texas, so that he could be interred beside his first wife, Jane. El Pasoans objected, and a court ultimately ruled that his grave would stay at Concordia Cemetery. John Wesley Hardin claimed to have killed more than 40 men. Historians have been able to confirm about half of those killings. He portrayed himself as a man who acted in self-defense and had no other choice but to commit the deeds he did. According to an article on Hardin in the Texas State Historical Association's Handbook of Texas Online, some people who knew him and his family agreed with this assessment, characterizing him as a gentleman and as a man who was more sinned against than sinning. But Wes Hardin was a terror to any man who crossed him or whom he perceived as having crossed him. And in the end, he left this world in the same violent manner in which he had forced so many others to leave it. So there you have it, the story of the infamous outlaw John Wesley Hardin. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, y'all.